Welcome to Voices of Experience. Today's program focuses on the 2013 record of the Minnesota State Legislature. What was accomplished? How does it affect everyday Minnesotans? Specifically, we'll be looking at public schools, pensions, taxes, social issues, job issues, and even one or two issues that are still waiting for action that will take place in 2014. I'm Dan Mikal, President Emeritus of the Minnesota State Retiree Council, and I will serve as host for today's program. Joining us today is a key member of the Minnesota House of Representatives, Erin Murphy, and she serves as the majority leader of the House and has a variety of leadership responsibilities, including counting votes. Personal disclosure, I served with Erin Murphy as a member of the Minnesota afl-cio Executive Board, where she served as a representative of the Minnesota Nurses Association. Erin Murphy was first elected in 2006, re-elected in 2008, re-elected in 2010, re-elected in 2012. Erin, you must be doing something right. And welcome to Voices of Experience.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Yeah. There's so many positive things that we have to talk about as far as the record of the 2013 state legislature. It's hard to know where to begin, but let's, with my own background, I want to begin with public schools.
Okay.
I have a special interest. I have a second grade grandson in the public schools. And some of my friends even have great-grandchildren in our public schools. Everyone is in favor of education. But this session, legislators voted to advance Minnesota's commitment to public education in significant ways. And I want to address a few of those issues. First of all, why was it necessary to increase the basic state aid going to schools?
Dan, as I talk with Minnesotans across the state, and one of the things I like best about my job, surveying the State House, is really being able to engage in a conversation with Minnesotans about what's important. Education is important all over the state. We understand in Minnesota that a well-educated population is key to our future, our economic prosperity, and to really a happy life in Minnesota. And we listened carefully to Minnesotans in the last election cycle, and they really wanted us to prioritize education. And we did a number of things, including funding the basic formula and giving an increase. We've had a series of deficits in Minnesota over the last decade, and we have barely kept up with the funding of our schools. And if we look at inflation over time, we've fallen behind. And you can see it in our schools, and you can see it in the education measured by the size of classes. In some places where they've shortened their school week from 5 days to 4 days, where they're limiting electives. And if we believe a well-educated population is important to our future, and if that is really a priority for us, then we need to fund it. And we did, by making sure that there was funding on the basic formula. It's a fundamental commitment to our future.
So there's been serious lack of adequate funding the last 10 years?
For a decade, we have been thinking about the budget in 2-year increments, balancing it to get out of the legislative session by borrowing from our schools, using tools like borrowing with tobacco appropriation bonds, taking money out of reserve accounts, and not really thinking about the future. And this current legislature, the one that came in 2013, took a different tack. We balanced the budget honestly into the future. We raised taxes to do it, and we put money into our priorities like education.
Now, as things are picking up in the state of Minnesota, what happens if there's more money coming into the state coffers than economists believed?
We had a meeting yesterday with the state economist, and Minnesota's economy is continuing to strengthen. And I give lots and lots of credit to Minnesotans for that. We worked very hard through the economic downturn, through that recession that started in 2008. And we're recovering, but we're not completely recovered. We still have people out of work, especially in places like the construction trades. And we still have a little work to do. And this budget that we just passed finally rectifies the last of the deficits. We had a $657 million deficit that we needed to fix. We still owed our schools $2.4 billion, or we borrowed $2.4 billion in the last budget cycle, and we're paying that back, and we're going to get that done this cycle. So we're finally fixing the debts that we owe to our schools. We're replenishing our reserve accounts, and we raised some taxes to pay for some key investments. I'm not certain that we're going to see into the foreseeable future a lot of extra money coming into Minnesota. And if we do, we'll make decisions about our future based on that.
One of the big accomplishments that I hear is that all-day, everyday kindergarten is going to be possible now throughout the state. Why is all-day, everyday important?
I think this is one of our proudest accomplishments of 2013. We know that that is important to get off to a really good start in education. And we know that we have an achievement gap in Minnesota where some kids are doing really well in our schools and other kids aren't keeping up. So we made a couple of, I think, very strategic investments in education, and one is all-day, everyday K, so that every child in Minnesota has the opportunity to have a full day of kindergarten, which means a full day of really quality education beginning at age 5. We also made investments for the first time since I have been in the legislature, really a strong investment in early childhood education, so that kids starting at age 3, and the data is unbelievably clear, that those young brains are taking up information and they are ready to learn. So we're going to take advantage of that and make sure that our kids have opportunity at education beginning at age 3, age 4, and by the time they're starting kindergarten, they have the opportunity to have a full day of education, which is going to prepare them for their future. And we know education is important. We know it's critical to our economic prosperity into the future and to the productivity of our workforce, and that's why we would put so much attention on it this session.
As an aside, I should tell you I have a daughter who is a kindergarten teacher in another state, and what she is teaching in kindergarten is what my wife used to teach in first grade.
Right.
My wife taught first grade full time for several years.
We know kids' capacity to learn
it's not the same kindergarten that
No,
we had.
It's not. There's one other important point about all-day K that I think we should talk about. So in some places in the state, the schools have decided to do that, and they are either paying for it and limiting other options like electives for kids in that school district. And in some places, all-day K is an option, and Minnesota families are paying sometimes $2,500 or $3,000 a year to take advantage of that. By providing all-day, everyday K across the state as an opportunity for every child, we're helping to make sure our kids are well educated, but we're also helping Minnesota families afford that opportunity by making sure that we're taking care of it all together.
So it does not matter what zip code you have.
It doesn't matter what zip code you have, and that's our commitment to education.
Okay. On the other end of the spectrum, on post-high school,
Yeah.
what is the DREAM Act?
The DREAM Act makes sure that kids get to go to school in Minnesota for in-state tuition, so for regular tuition. So there are kids that are in Minnesota and they have been here their whole life and their parents may be undocumented. And they have been able to maybe get to college, but they're not paying in-state tuition, so it's been unaffordable for them. And the DREAM Act allows them to go to college in Minnesota because they live in Minnesota, they're Minnesota residents, and pay the tuition that my child pays as well, making college affordable for them and making it possible for them to go to college and get ahead.
So the child who didn't have anything to say about coming to Minnesota with or without papers has an opportunity to gain knowledge and to gain skills at an affordable price.
Exactly. It's a pretty common sense. It's a pretty common sense solution. It's obvious that we should do that.
Yeah. Also, in higher education, what is the tuition freeze, and why was that necessary?
Well, I think one of the things I believe and my colleagues believe is Minnesota's economy is going to be its strongest when we have a strong middle class. And as we have been budgeting and trying to rectify deficits, we've been making a lot of cuts in the state's budget. And we cut like 17% out of higher education in the last budget, the 2011-2012 budget. And that resulted in another raise in tuition prices for Minnesota families. And they've been seeing a steady increase in tuition increases. I have one daughter in college and one who's just graduated at the University of Minnesota, and tuition is becoming very, very expensive. And if we believe a college education is important for our children, we have to make it affordable. So we increased funding to our universities in this budget cycle, but we also said, you're going to freeze tuition. We expect that tuition will be frozen, and we made it a matter of state law so that the increase that we put into higher education results in more affordable tuition for Minnesota families and Minnesota kids. And that is one way we believe we are strengthening the middle class and making sure that Minnesota's economy is growing again.
I'm thinking my own experience, or my own two daughters who graduated from college, and my wife. We graduated without owing a dime.
That's not true for most kids anymore.
No,
They're coming out of college, including mine, with a lot of debt.
Yeah.
And as my daughter, who graduated this June, is looking for a job, she's really worried about the student loans coming due and making sure she's got a job where she can pay them back. And that means maybe not being able to find the job that she wants, but a job that she needs in order to start paying that obligation back.
It affects the type of job that you take.
It absolutely does. It limits your options.
And that also limits your money. You have so much money to spend. That affects cars.
Yeah.
Buying not even a new car, even buying a used car, or buying a house. If you don't have that money available, that's slowing the economy down, because you're putting that money back into paying your bills from college.
Right.
So
I grew up in a family with 5 kids, and I mostly put myself through school. My parents helped me a little bit, but I had to borrow some money, but not so much that I couldn't afford to pay it back. And I got a job, as a registered nurse, and paid my debt back to the schools, and I was able to move forward and buy a car and buy a home when I got married. I could manage all those things, but the debt that kids are carrying now is making that very difficult.
Yes. Now the bill, type of bills that we've been talking about, that are good public policy, and they have the support of across the aisle, both Democrats and other people. Or is there a difference in the parties when the button has to be pressed, the green button or the red button?
As I mentioned earlier, I think across Minnesota there's a lot of support for education, and I'm back out talking to people in Minnesota, going back to the doors and visiting with Minnesotans and hearing from them that they support our strategic investments in education. What's different between my colleagues in the DFL caucus and those across the aisle is we honestly paid for our investments. We knew that if we wanted to make a strong investment in education for the future, that we're going to have to raise some taxes to do it. And I think there were a number of my colleagues in the Republican caucus who supported our education proposals, and some voted for them, but no one voted for the tax bill to pay for it. And we've had an ideological divide in the Minnesota legislature for a decade now over whether or not to raise taxes. And raising taxes is a hard choice, but in order to achieve the priorities that Minnesotans were asking for, to make sure that we paid back our schools, to fix the budget and balance it honestly, to make an investment in schools, to look out for our economy and jobs and reduce property taxes, we needed to balance the budget honestly, and that meant raising taxes. And my Republican colleagues aren't ready to do that yet.
So we're putting our money where our mouth is.
That's right.
Yeah. So.